Did you ever wonder what would have happened if Luffy was raised with Doflamingo? Or what if all the Straw Hats were at Marineford? Or even better, what if Luffy became an admiral? Or if the Straw Hats had a time machine? Well, in this video, I'll cover all of these, plus many more insane what-if scenarios, like if Luffy was raised with Doflamingo, it would go something like this. For starters, I'll assume Luffy ended up in Trevor's care at a young age before he ever got his Devil Fruit powers, possibly around the same time as when Doflamingo met Trevor. We all know how that story goes. Doflamingo goes crazy, kills his father, blah blah blah. But in this timeline, with the influence of Trevor, Luffy would be the one to save Doflamingo from being burned alive by the people of the island. He would then give Doflamingo the gun to kill his father and traumatize Corazon. You must remember that Trevor is not a nice dude. He's the person who created Doflamingo's twisted worldview, so it's safe to say he would do the same to Luffy, brainwashing him into being a sadistic, cruel kid. This would later backfire, but we'll get to that in a bit. Luffy would then grow up as the leader of the Don Quixote family. Well, in this timeline, it'd be known as the Monkey family. Trevor, Doflamingo, and Luffy would become super close, causing chaos and violence wherever they went. Trevor would even teach Luffy the cruel ways of the underworld at an early age. Seeing how evil and sadistic Luffy has become, Trevor would offer the string fruit to him and not Doflamingo. This would make Luffy ridiculously strong, as he was already well trained in hockey prior to receiving the fruit. Luffy would learn to master this fruit to its fullest extent, even surpassing original Dofi. It's important to note that in this timeline, Luffy would be absolutely terrifying. He would have no moral compass and smile a lot less than in the original story. With Trevor and the Monkey family's help, Luffy would do all the things that Doflamingo did in the main story, like take over Dressrosa, kill innocent people, and all sorts of wicked things. They would also find a young helpless kid named Trafalgar D. Law. Law would trust Luffy instantly, seeing as they share the same D initial in their names. They would form a close bond, and Luffy would even help Law and Corazon get the 𝑴𝒂𝒆𝒔𝒕𝒆𝒓 no Mi and heal his sickness. Another change to the main story would be that Corazon never dies on the island trying to save Law, because Luffy would never want the 𝑴𝒂𝒆𝒔𝒕𝒆𝒓 no Mi. I believe he wouldn't have an interest for it. This means the family would have Corazon and Law as prime members. But this is where the story would take a dark turn. This Luffy would become so powerful at the age of 17, even Trevor's brainwashing wouldn't be able to contain him much longer. He would become a rising warlord candidate before the age of 17, and eventually Trevor would try to use Luffy as a puppet the same way he used Doflamingo. But unlike Dofi, Luffy would kill him instantly. But in the end, he and the rest of the family would eventually be thrown in jail after Corazon would snitch to the world government about all their evil doing, only sparing Law. Wow, that timeline took a tragic turn. It's crazy that Luffy being raised by Trevor would make him so evil. Okay, but what would have happened if Luffy was raised by Foxy the Silver Fox? First of all, let me tell you this scenario would be absolutely hilarious. Foxy is a professional loser, but he is also a genius at cheating, tactics, mind games, distraction techniques, and psychological warfare. And his parenting style would be no different. And I believe with him raising Luffy, he would teach him all of this and more. Luffy would grow up being a very cheeky kid, using trickery, illusions, and cheap shots to outsmart adults. Growing up on Foxy's ship, Luffy would adopt Foxy's cocky attitude and would even see himself as extremely good-looking, similar to Foxy. Obviously, Luffy wouldn't have the gum fruit, but he would become a very skilled boxer, seeing as Foxy was a professional boxer before becoming a thieving pirate. At the age of 17, Luffy would leave Foxy's ship in order to start his own crew, which he would build up by winning Davy Back fights, something he picked up from Foxy. Although this crew would be much more goofier than the original Straw Hats and even more stupid, often sucking up to Luffy whenever an opponent hurt his ego or called him ugly. They would often break into dance and celebrate each time they won a Davy Back fight. Luffy would gain tremendous fame throughout the first half of the Grand Line as the famed captain of the Luffy Pirates. Yes, Luffy would name his crew after himself, perks of being raised by a self-absorbed pirate. The Marines would obviously take note of this and give Luffy a bounty of 100 million berries, similar to what he had during the original Long Ring, Long Land arc. The real question is, would Luffy even be stronger enough to go to the Grand Line? Well, no. Luffy would only know one fighting style, which is boxing, and would have no clue how to even use hockey. Eventually, he would get hunted by the Marines for trying to Davy Back fight a Marine ship, something cocky Luffy would definitely try to do. In this timeline, Luffy was too busy trolling the entire world rather than finding the One Piece. But what would happen if Bon Clay raised Luffy? Well, first of all, if Luffy somehow ended up being raised by Bon Clay, we can assume he would be treated in the best way possible, probably buying him loads of flamboyant gifts. Luffy would grow up around Alabasta, seeing as Bon Clay is a member of Baroque Works. But he really wouldn't have any meaningful connections with any of the members besides Bon Clay. Luffy would go on missions with Bon Clay, where he would teach him all the ways of the organization, and even give Luffy a few lessons in 𝑴𝒂𝒆𝒔𝒕𝒆𝒓, a fighting style that combines acrobatic kicks and sometimes punches with ballet dancing. This would make Luffy a formidable opponent, similar to Sanji's strength during Alabasta. Luffy would adopt Bon Clay's weird outfits, paired with his original free laughing spirit. Bon Clay would treat Luffy not as his son, but as a little brother, best friend, and dance partner. Similar to Bon Clay, Luffy would be extremely loyal and selfless in this timeline. Since the Straw Hats don't exist in this timeline, Bon Clay would never have to kill Mr. 3 for failing to eliminate the Straw Hats, and would just stick to helping Luffy get stronger and eventually join Baroque Works. The entire Alabasta arc would also never happen. Over time, Luffy would be finally strong enough to join Baroque Works as Mr. 13. Eventually, Baroque Works would take over Alabasta, with Luffy playing a pivotal role in this, capturing Cobra and identifying Vivi as Miss Wednesday. Crocodile would give Luffy a promotion as Mr. 2.0, an extension of Bon Clay, and would be seen as the third strongest member of Baroque Works. This was the Luffy who would excel in observation haki and be a master of disguise. He would briefly meet Ace in Alabasta, and they would have an instant bond, as if they knew each other in another life. Ace would give Luffy his Viver card so that he can always find him. Eventually, the organization would fall by the Marines, just like the main story, and they would all be thrown in Impel Down. During this time, Ace would also be captured and soon to be executed. Hearing of this, Luffy planned to break out of Impel Down with the help of Bon Clay and 𝒂𝒂𝒔𝒕𝒆𝒓 to save his friend, eventually arriving on the battlefield alongside his mentor and best friend, Bon Clay. And in a miraculous turn of events, Luffy and Bon Clay would save Ace. With Luffy being much smarter in this timeline and a master of disguise and deception, he would sneak Ace out of the battlefield before anyone could notice. Everything else in Marineford would remain the same as in the original story. Luffy would later start his own crew with Bon Clay, and even have a bounty of 1 billion berries, as the government saw his rescue of Ace as a great crime to order and justice. Luffy would later learn he has Conqueror's Haki, and would hone this skill along with learning Armament Haki from Ace. Just like the main story, Luffy would become a great pirate with his crew being named the strongest of the new generation. But would this Luffy be as strong as the original Luffy? Not quite, but he would be smarter. Man, who would have guessed this scenario would end so well? But now it's time for the part of the video you've all been waiting for. What would have happened if Luffy was raised by One Piece's biggest loser, Buggy? If Luffy somehow ended up in Buggy's care, it's safe to assume nothing would go smoothly. For starters, Buggy is not responsible, not very clever, and he is definitely not mentally prepared to raise a child who punches Sea Kings. But there is something people forget. Buggy sailed with Roger. He sailed with Shanks. He survived the Grand Line. And despite being terrified 99% of the time, the man simply does not die. That alone already makes him a better parent than you'd expect. As a parent, Buggy would tell Luffy all sorts of stories, some true, some false, about his journey with the Roger Pirates, and how he survived the Grand Line. He would also tell Luffy that he was so close to seeing the One Piece if it wasn't for him falling sick, which Luffy clowned him for. Luffy would be so intrigued by these stories that he would promise to be a great pirate and find the One Piece for Buggy, which would make Buggy feel a little weird, but deep down inside, he would be proud. Luffy would also be really interested in one of the pirates Buggy told him about while he was part of the Roger Pirates. Obviously, I'm talking about Shanks. Luffy would look up to him and want to meet him someday, which would give him motivation to train hard. Growing up, Luffy would be surrounded by treasure maps, failed get-rich schemes, muggy balls exploding at the wrong time, and Buggy screaming every 5 minutes. But this environment would accidentally create a very different kind of Luffy. Smarter, because he'd have to solve every problem Buggy creates. Craftier, because Buggy relies on trickery and theatrics. Strangely observant, because surviving Buggy's ship requires awareness of flying knives, cannonballs, and limbs floating around. Luffy would also learn showmanship, which boosts intimidation. Kind of like how Usopp acts bold even when he's scared. So ironically, this Luffy would actually be pretty smart for a kid. But what about his strength? Would Luffy be as weak as Buggy, or would he be even stronger than him? Well, first off, Buggy would not give Luffy a devil fruit. Why? Because Buggy is traumatized by fruits thanks to Shanks. So this version of Luffy is fruitless for most of his early life. And because he has no fruit, he actually focuses more on Haki, which he accidentally learned thanks to the luck that runs through Buggy's entirely life. It would rub off on Luffy. Something to note here is that Luffy would be an extremely lucky person, with a lot of things simply just always going his way. Buggy would also teach Luffy some acrobatics and weapon fighting, which Luffy would mix with what he thought Shanks' fighting style would be. Which means this Luffy becomes more like a hybrid of Buggy and Shanks, which would annoy Buggy. He wouldn't understand why Luffy looked up to Shanks so much. But what can he do? At the age of 17, Luffy would decide to leave Buggy and start his own crew, with a goal to find the One Piece and show it to Buggy. By this point, Luffy would be much stronger than the original Luffy during the East Blue. He would already know armament and observation haki. Surprisingly, Luffy's first mate would actually be Usopp, as he heard from Buggy that Shanks has an incredible sniper on his crew. Luffy's entire crew setup would be modeled around Shanks's crew, and similar to original Luffy, he'd want his crew to be strong as well as funny, so he would seek the famous pirate hunter Zoro. At first, Zoro would not want to join the crew, but then Luffy would show him his incredible strength and haki, which would impress Zoro enough to eventually join the crew. I believe Luffy's crew wouldn't really change from the main story, as he still looks up to Shanks and wants his crew exactly like his. The first half of the Grand Line would be pretty easy for the crew, as Luffy would be way stronger than most enemies they faced, and knowing haki early on really helped. Along the way, they would pick up Robin, Brook, and Frankie. He would teach every crew member armament and observation haki too. Luffy would also be way more goofier than in the original story, and often play pranks on Zoro and Sanji. His crew would be named after his beloved mentor Buggy and his idol Shanks. Mixing the red from Shanks' crew name and Buggy's prominent nose, he would come up with the name the Red-Nosed Pirates. Obviously, Nami would think this is an awful name, but what can she do? After reaching the Sabaody Archipelago, Luffy and the Red-Nosed Pirates would be attacked by the world government, similar to the original story. But this time, they'd come out alive and even take down a few pacifistas in Sentomaru. Remember, the entire crew already knows haki, including the weakling trio, so they definitely much stronger than the original Straw Hats. Kizaru would even clash with Luffy for a while, and that's when Luffy would unlock Conqueror's haki. Kizaru would be taken back by this, and in that moment, Luffy would escape with his crew unarmed. But would this version of the Straw Hats be capable enough to save Ace during Marineford? I think yes. I mean, they all know haki, which would be so beneficial in fighting strong Marines. So in this timeline, I think Ace would be saved as well as Whitebeard. The rest of the story would play out similar to the main story, but with the crew defeating all their enemies much quicker than usual. They would make quick work out of Horty Jones, Caesar the Clown, Doflamingo, Katakuri, without even needing the time skip. Luffy's luck would carry him all the way to defeating Kaido, after a few tries of course, and become one of the strongest non-Devil Fruit users the world has ever seen, some even comparing him to Shanks in terms of mastery of haki. He would be named a Yonko, and be on track to becoming the Pirate King, and finding the One Piece to show his mentor Buggy what there are still many more what-if scenarios I'll cover in this video. Next up! What if Luffy, Zoro, and all the other Straw Hats were at Marineford with the current abilities? How would the battle turn out? Would Luffy and Akainu be an even match? Will Aokiji outclass Zoro in the battlefield? Or will Sanji be fast enough to defeat Kizaru? Most importantly, how would the story turn out if these events took place? Well, that's what we're gonna try and find out in this incredible scenario. Firstly, to make this video even more interesting, I'm gonna bring along Loki to this battle as a Straw Hat crew member, since Luffy has already asked him to join the crew, which he declined, but still, there's a high possibility that we're looking at a new crewmate. But anyway, in this scenario, Marineford happens way later in the story. Firstly, Ace is not captured before the time skip and lives out pre-time skip. One Piece searching for Blackbeard, but he never finds him, so he eventually gives up the search for now and focuses on helping his papa Whitebeard become Pirate King. Meanwhile, Blackbeard starts to form his own crew. Everything else plays out the same as in the original story. He still eats the dark fruit and recruits every crewmate he has currently, apart from the ones he got from the Impel Down escape. The Straw Hats still go on their training arc and the time skip still happens, but the only difference is that Luffy isn't feeling the loss of his brother because he is not dead. At least, not yet. Some time has passed, and Blackbeard is finally ready to initiate his plan of stealing the world's strongest man's devil fruit and become a Yonko in his own right. But to do so, he needs a few things to fall in his path. Firstly, he needs something to leverage against the world government to make him a warlord of the sea. So he plans to capture Ace. In this timeline, the warlord system is still up and running, with all warlords being the same with just one vacant spot like in the original story. Blackbeard's crew is a shadow of what it is in the actual series, because he never got the chance to recruit his other crewmates. But that doesn't mean they aren't strong. The time skip still happens, and they also go on a training arc learning haki and all about the new world. Now let's go back to Blackbeard's plan. Since he needs to capture Ace in order to become a warlord, he begins taunting him once again by attacking some of the Whitebeard pirates' territories to get Ace to come after him. And Ace most definitely bites the bait. Ace tells Whitebeard and the Whitebeard pirates that he is going to hunt down Blackbeard and avenge their friend. Whitebeard in his old age does not have the strength to stop him, so he goes on the journey alone. Now much stronger because of the time skip. He ends up finding Blackbeard and his crew in Hachinosu. You may ask, why is Blackbeard in Hachinosu? Well, Blackbeard's journey still plays out the same as in the original story. The only difference is his crew isn't fully complete yet, and he is in a Yonko. King Ace at Hachinosu makes Blackbeard laugh hysterically, knowing his plan is working. Ace, being overconfident as he always has been, tries to launch an attack on Blackbeard alone, but this just backfires. Blackbeard counters and defeats Ace like in the original story, with his rare ability to nullify Devil Fruit users. Now that Blackbeard has captured Ace, he decides to hand him over to the government. In turn, they make him a warlord of the sea. But little do they know, Blackbeard is not just aiming for the warlord title. He wants to be an emperor. And what's the best way to become an emperor? It's by killing one and taking their place. So, as the news goes out that Ace got captured and is set for an execution, Whitebeard hears this and is enraged. As old as he is, he couldn't do enough to stop Ace from going out and searching for Blackbeard. So he decides he will go on his last ever battle and declare war on the government to save his son. Meanwhile, the Straw Hats just arrived in Elbaf and have been chilling with 𝒂𝒄𝒏 and Loki when they hear the news. Luffy is absolutely furious once hearing the news and immediately decides to attack Marineford to rescue his brother. Not like he hasn't declared war on the world government before, but this time it won't be the same. They are much stronger than before and have a special someone coming along. They leave Elbaf as fast as possible and take Loki along with them as a new crewmate. I don't know how he's gonna fit in the Sunny, but I think they will figure it out. As the Straw Hats head to Marineford, Yamato hears about the news of Ace's execution, and since I don't know if I should say he or she, but yeah, let's go with she. Since she has such a close bond with Ace, without question, she sails for Marineford, leaving Momo to take care of things in Wano. As she leaves the Wano country, she meets up with the Straw Hats while on the seas and joins them as they all head for Marineford. Luffy alerts all his allies and assembles his grand fleet. Bartolomeo is super excited that Luffy has finally called upon him and sets sail right away, raising the Straw Hats Jolly Roger with pride. News travels that Luffy's grand fleet is assembling, which prompts Whitebeard to send Luffy a message and asks him to team up for this audacious rescue. Luffy agrees, seeing as the Whitebeard pirates are Ace's family. Meanwhile, the government hear about this alliance and decide that they can't withstand an attack from two Yonkos just as they are, so they call upon CP0 and the Gods Knights because this is a war that could endanger the entire world government system and become a threat to Imu and the Celestial Dragons. But funny enough, Garling refuses to allow the whole world to see the Holy Knights just yet, so he tells Fleet Admiral Sengoku that the Holy Knights will only be deployed if Shanks and the Red Hair Pirates join the frame, which angers Sengoku. He tells Garling that if they don't use all the might they have, the government will be destroyed entirely. But Garling doesn't budge. If you're wondering why Sengoku is still the Fleet Admiral, well, in this timeline, he never retires. Akainu and Aokiji remain admirals, and the Yonkos at the moment are Luffy, Whitebeard, Shanks, and a vacant spot because of Big Mom's defeat, which is why Blackbeard is making his move. Obviously, Blackbeard has now become a warlord and is patiently waiting for the attack on Marineford to begin. Meanwhile, Shanks hears of this all-out war that's about to take place and sets sail for Marineford to at least try and stop the bloodshed. As the Straw Hat Grand Fleet and the Whitebeard Pirates Armada arrive at Marineford, the Navy is prepared with all their forces in the front lines staring down at the armada of ships. The warlords, the admirals, CP0, the Seraphim, pacifistas, and the Navy officers all waiting for Luffy and his allies to attack. The energy is tense. Whitebeard in his sickly state walks to the front of the head ship with Luffy right next to it. He looks up at the enemy and shouts, "Ace, I'm coming to save you, my son, even if it has to kill me, so hold on, because every last one of these men will fight to the death for you." As he said this, the entire fleet roars in support and Ace gets emotional. Sengoku is tense. Akainu scoffs and Blackbeard is grinning at the sight of being so close to achieving everything that he needs to become a Yonko. Whitebeard stands in position and uses his Devil Fruit, causing the Navy forces to panic. A huge tsunami rises on its way to flood the island. Aokiji jumps in the air and freezes the entire tsunami, which impresses Whitebeard. Aokiji attacks Whitebeard with his partisan attack and freezes the entire ocean, but this is no problem for Whitebeard. He just uses his Devil Fruit and deflects the attack. Everyone just stares at this altercation, waiting for the order to charge. Luffy steps forward and shouts, "Let's go!" and the entire fleet charges towards the enemy. Yamato, Katakuri, the Wano Samurai, Loki, the Straw Hats all ready for the fight. As they're running, Sengoku tells the Marines if any of them are committed to keeping peace, they will fight like it's their last day on Earth. And the two forces collide. Luffy, Zoro, Loki, and Sanji waste no time with the fodder and go straight for the three admirals and Sengoku, while the warlords are occupied with the Whitebeard pirates. CP0 is dealing with Katakuri, Yamato, and the Straw Hats. Sengoku and Loki clash, both using Conqueror's Haki coding, so their attacks send a huge wave of energy across the entire battlefield, splitting the sky. Sanji clashes with Kizaru, using his Diable Jambe attack, while Kizaru blocks it with his own attack. Zoro tests Aokiji's strength, sending a huge slash towards Aokiji, but he blocks it with a Sword of Ice. And Luffy goes straight into Gear 4 Snakemon, zipping through the skies, and the two behemoths clash, with Akainu smiling menacingly because he finally gets to put the Son of Dragon in an early grave. Some other notable clashes are Yamato clashing with Lucci, Katakuri clashing with Kaku, Marco with Mihawk, Jinbei clashing with Smoker. As Whitebeard looks to the fight between Luffy and Akainu, he decides to interfere so that Luffy has a chance to go save Ace, so he swoops in telling Luffy to go save his brother. Akainu looks at Whitebeard with frustration, calling him a washed-up legend. Meanwhile, Luffy hurries to save Ace, moving past every Marine with relative ease, until he meets Garp at the top of the execution platform. Garp smiles and says, "Luffy, you're all grown up now, all big and strong." But Luffy just ignores this and tells his grandfather to step aside. He has to save Ace. Garp agrees with Luffy, but does not let him know this. His plan was to act like he's with the Marines, but deep down, he wants to save his boy. Luffy yells again, "Step aside, Grandpa!" But Garp tells Luffy that since he's now a Yonko, there's no need for him to pull any punches. He will go all out to test Luffy's strength. He then jumps up in the air and unleashes a glorious galaxy impact. Luffy counters with his own Red Rock, which sends shockwaves across the entire battlefield. Luffy wins the clash and knocks him down. He runs past Garp saying, "Sorry, Grandpa," and uses his Conqueror's Haki to knock out the two executioners. He grabs Ace's cuffs and breaks it using Haki, freeing his beloved brother. Ace is happy to see Luffy and tells him proudly he's become so strong. Luffy just grins, saying confidently, "I'm gonna be king of the pirates, I have to be." They escape together, knocking down Marines in the process. Meanwhile, Akainu is absolutely battering Whitebeard to the brink of death. He decides he's had enough of this fight and wants to end it right away. Ace looks on at Whitebeard. He's enraged seeing his papa so hurt, but Luffy holds Ace down, telling him they have to go. They can't save everyone. Meanwhile, Zoro is having trouble with Aokiji, who seems to have the upper hand. Aokiji and Zoro share blows, attack after attack. It's an intense battle that puts a dent in Zoro's stamina, but he realizes that he does not have to defeat Aokiji, only hold him off till it's time to escape with Ace, which he does. Sanji is no better with Kizaru. Matter of fact, Kizaru is absolutely tearing Sanji up. Light kick after light kick. Multiple barrages of light beams being thrown his way. All he can do is dodge. He thinks to himself, saying, "Luffy, hurry up, I can't hang on much longer." While Sanji is struggling with Kizaru, Loki is relishing at the fact of fighting an admiral. Sengoku goes into his Buddha form and Loki smiles vigorously. He swings his hammer so fast as they clash again and again and again. Sengoku thinks he's too old to fight Loki for a long time, but Loki is absolutely enjoying this. The battle ensues, both sides using all their might to conquer each other. But suddenly Luffy sends a huge Conqueror's Haki burst throughout the battlefield, knocking out all the weak-willed warriors. He tells his fleet that it's time to leave. Their mission is rescuing Ace, not winning a battle against the world government. Everyone agrees and use their last attacks to create space so they can escape. Luffy is still trying to hold Ace down while Akainu batters Whitebeard. Luffy is also enraged by this, but he knows this was what Whitebeard wanted. He uses Gear 5 to turn the ground into a bouncy floor so that all his allies can propel themselves to their ships. Garp laughs, seeing how strong Luffy has become. Luffy's Haki in his Gear 5 form is so strong that even Aimu feels it all the way in the Holy Land. He orders Garling to send the Holy Knights to end Luffy once and for all. The God's Knights arrive. Everyone is shocked, seeing the absolute pinnacle of the world government's power. Shamrock looks at Luffy intensely. Luffy is confused. Is that Shanks? Has he betrayed the pirates to join the world government? But Shamrock tells Luffy to not compare him to his foolish brother, which surprises everyone in the battlefield. They all shout, "Shanks has a brother!" While this is happening, Blackbeard does exactly what he did in the original story, recruiting all his crewmates from Impel Down and coming back to the battlefield with huge confidence. He thinks it's finally time to take that pesky devil fruit of Whitebeard's. But Akainu is borderline about to kill this man. Ace finally gets away from Luffy's grip and charges for Akainu. Akainu. Luffy tries to catch him, but it's too late. Akainu raises his magma fist, about to penetrate Ace's torso. Luffy tries using even more of Gear 5 speed to get close to Ace, but Shamrock comes and stops him with his Cerberus sword. As Ace is about to get turned into a donut, a man stands in front of him to take the blow. It's Whitebeard! He looks over at Ace and tells him to stay strong. Ace is emotional. Akainu pushes his fist even deeper, making Whitebeard cough out blood. In his last moment, Whitebeard yells, "There's nothing you government dogs can do. Nika is here. The end of your reign is here. And the One Piece is real." Everyone is shocked by Whitebeard's last proclamation before falling into Ace's arms. All the pirates roar in excitement as Whitebeard's final word sends hope into their hearts. Ace cries deeply at the sight of his papa's body on the brink of death. He looks at Akainu, who tells Ace he's next, and charges an attack. They clash, but Akainu is seemingly stronger. Blackbeard looks at Whitebeard's body and scrambles to do whatever it is he does to steal devil fruits. As Akainu fights Ace, Blackbeard steals Whitebeard's fruit and exercises its power, showing the entire world his ability to have 2 devil fruits. Shamrock is quite surprised, so are the admirals, and Loki thinks to himself, that guy reminds me of Rocks. But as everyone is in awe, a certain someone arrives. It's none other than Shanks. He blocks Akainu's attack that would have killed Ace and tells him that fighting is pointless now. He looks at everyone and says, if anyone wants to carry on fighting, you will have to face the full force of the Red Hair Pirates. Man, that was an epic scenario, but one even crazier is this next one. Did you ever wonder what would have happened if the Straw Hats had a time machine? Would they be able to change the past and erase every horrible thing that's ever happened to them? Or would they just screw up the entire timeline, causing them to never meet? Our story begins right after their escape from Egghead Island. The Thousand Sunny drifts into a mysterious fog, and the crew discovers an ancient ruin with a strange dial-powered device glowing at its center. Robin recognizes it instantly, a forbidden relic from the Void Century, a time machine once used by the ancient kingdom. Luffy, of course, wants to jump in immediately, but the crew stops him. Everyone is excited about this new discovery. The crew debates and ultimately decide that each crewmate should have a chance to go on their own journey and use the time machine to go wherever in time they want. Everyone has a past they'd change, but messing with time comes with great consequences. Luffy, being impatient and excited, decides to go first. He wishes to go back in time and save his older brother Ace from dying, and the rest of the crew follows, going on their own journeys. So what exactly happens when Luffy goes back in time? Well, the story takes an interesting turn. Since Luffy isn't really the smartest, he goes straight back into the Marineford War a few moments before the executioners are about to execute Ace. Lightning strikes the battlefield and suddenly a time machine spawns on Whitebeard's ship, and Luffy walks out of it with a huge smile on his face. Everyone is obviously shocked to see this, and especially the Luffy of this time. Future Luffy wastes no time jumping straight for the executioner's platform while knocking down all weak Marines in the process with his Conqueror's Haki. Luffy saves Ace, and everything else goes kind of the same, just like the main story, but the only difference is Whitebeard dies while being distracted by future Luffy's arrival. Akainu punched a hole through his back while he wasn't looking. This broke Ace, and he hated future Luffy for this. Future Luffy was obviously sad about this, but he let Ace live his life. So what exactly happens after the Marineford War? Well, since Ace survives, Luffy does not get the same motivation to become stronger like in the main story, so the Straw Hats are significantly weaker. And although Luffy still wants to become Pirate King, his resolve is not as strong as it once was, and the crew end up getting defeated in the Grand Line by one of the Yonkos. As for Ace, he becomes the Whitebeard Pirates captain with one goal in mind: killing Blackbeard for starting the Paramount War and murdering Thatch, despite future Luffy's warnings. Some time passes and Ace still falls to Blackbeard, but this time Blackbeard steals Ace's devil fruit and hands him over to the Marines to be kept as a prisoner for life. What a crazy turn of events. But what happened with Zoro's journey? Well, upon using the time machine, Zoro had a few ideas about where he would go. He wondered if he could meet Ryuma or train with the greatest swordsman in history, but he ended up deciding to go back in time and save Kuina. Upon arriving in the past, Zoro goes back to his old dojo and tells his former master that he's from the future. Koshiro is obviously shocked by this, but he doesn't think too much of it and allows Zoro to stay at the dojo. They sit together and have some sake while Zoro tells him stories about his journey with the Straw Hats, meeting a zombie Ryuma and how strong he became, and even showed off Enma. He also told him about Kuina's death and that he can't allow her to mess mess around with stairs, and so that's what he did. Zoro also spent time watching young Zoro and Kuina training, and this caused him to shed a tear. Kuina survives because of Zoro's intervention, but this has some serious effects on the timeline. Zoro preventing Kuina's death causes her to become his rival, constantly competing against one another to see who becomes the strongest. Instead of pushing himself for her dream, Zoro has no singular vow to carry since Kuina is still alive and can carry on her dream on her own. Kuina grows up and possibly even surpasses him due to her overcompensating for being a woman. Zoro never meets Luffy and never joins the Straw Hats as his focus was only getting stronger as a swordsman and not looking for adventure. I'll reveal the crew's reaction to all these changes to the timeline by the end of the video, so keep watching. Okay, now let's talk about what happened during Nami's journey through time. As soon as Nami saw the time machine, she knew exactly where she was going. Obviously to free Kokoyashi Village earlier and spare Belle-Mare's life. So how exactly will Nami do this? Well, Nami is pretty smart, so she thought the best way to save Kokoyashi Village and Belle-Mare is to go way back before Arlong even stepped foot in the village. And by way back, I mean she went back to the time when Arlong was still part of the Sun Pirates and got thrown in jail. Once Nami arrived, she went looking for Jinbei and the Sun Pirates, eventually finding them right before Jinbei was about to release Arlong from prison. She pleaded to Jinbei, telling him that she's from the future and the horrible things Arlong did after being freed. Jinbei was obviously confused, but he did have some sense of trust in Nami's story because Arlong always showed signs of doing evil things. So eventually he agreed to not free Arlong, which made Nami extremely grateful. But because of all this, Nami never became a pirate as she lived a comfortable, happy life with Belle-Mare, Nojiko, and all the other villagers. Aw, this was actually so wholesome despite Nami never joining the crew. When Usopp first got hold of the time machine, his instinct was to jump straight into the future and see whether the crew had finally found the One Piece. But after some thought, he chose a different path, the past. Usopp traveled back to be with his mother again. He spent every moment by her side, filling her in on the life he lived, the adventures he had, and the friends he made. They laughed, cried, and shared the time they never got in his real childhood. But Usopp didn't stop there. He confronted his father Yasopp directly. Face to face, he told him the harsh truth, that he was a terrible father for leaving, and that once his wife passed away, he had no right to abandon his son too. The words cut deep, and Yasopp was shaken to his core. Racked with guilt, he rejected Shanks' invitation to join the Red Hair Pirates, deciding instead to remain in Syrup Village. But this had some catastrophic consequences on the timeline. Because Yasopp was such an integral part of the Red Hair Pirates, him not joining made the crew much weaker, causing them to not have the same reputation they had in the main story. In the main story, Shanks spends a year in Fuchsia gathering supplies and men. Yasopp being from Syrup Village gives the crew a reason to linger in East Blue, but with him not joining makes Shanks less likely to stick around that long, prompting him to leave way before inspiring Luffy to chase his dream of piracy. Instead, Luffy went down a different path entirely. He joined the Marine. And with Luffy never setting sail, Usopp never had the push to leave Syrup Village either. Yikes, this timeline took a serious turn. At least Kuro won't be able to trick Kaya with Yasopp on the island. Did Sanji fare any better on his own journey through time? Well, he obviously went back in time to stop Judge and save his mother. He returned to the past and prevented Sora from ever taking the drug to counteract the Germa genes. After doing this, Sanji wept. Seeing his mother once again brought back so many memories. He caught up with her, telling her everything. Her eyes filled with pride told Sanji he is the best thing that's ever happened to her. Sora survived, and young Sanji finally had the loving parent he always longed for. Her presence even softened Judge's cold, ruthless heart. But only slightly. With Sora alive, Sanji never ran away. But this had a horrible effect on him. He grew up fully under Germa influence. And without his mother's sacrifice shaping his birth, he didn't inherit the same kindness and compassion we know him for. Instead, he became colder, harder, more like his brothers. That single change sealed his fate. He never fled to the seas, never ended up at the Baratie, and never crossed paths with Luffy. The Straw Hats lost their cook before they ever set sail. So much for rewriting his pain into something better. Unlike Chopper, whose journey miraculously had zero effect on the timeline. Well, to understand that, we have to look into what happened during Chopper's journey. Of course, we all know Chopper would want to go back and save his beloved mentor, 𝒂𝒂𝒄𝒄, but would he be able to? I don't think so, seeing as 𝒂𝒂𝒄 had an incurable disease, and at this point in time, Chopper has not yet been able to cure every single disease known to man. So I think Chopper would just spend his time with 𝒂𝒂𝒄. They would share stories, and Chopper will even tell him that he's from the future. Seeing 𝒂𝒂𝒄 one more time would cause Chopper to burst into tears, as he has no way of saving him even with the power to go back in time. 𝒂𝒂𝒄 consoled him, telling Chopper it's all right, he's lived a long and wonderful life. But what would happen to the timeline? Well, nothing, since Chopper did not change anything from the original timeline. The same cannot be said for Robin. You see, when Robin recognized the strange relic from the Void Century, she knew the time machine would be her way to right the wrongs of the world government. Obviously, I'm talking about saving her mother and O'Hara. So Robin lands in the past 5 years before the Buster Call ever happened. Robin reunites with everyone with tears in her eyes, tells them that she's from the future, but they weren't surprised at all, as Robin looks almost identical to her mother, and the O'Hara scholars were familiar with the time machine, as they know most things about the Void Century. Robin would pour her heart out to Clover and tell him how sorry she is. Clover would say it's okay and lead her to her mother, where a 3-year-old Nico Robin would be playing with some books from the library. Robin would smile, seeing that her younger self is still just as curious as ever. Olvia would share a heartfelt mother-daughter moment with Robin, and that's when Robin would tell them that in 5 years, the government will destroy the island and all its inhabitants. They were obviously shocked by this, but they listened to future Robin's warning and began preparation to move to a new island where the world government would never find them. Of course, it wasn't easy for Clover and the others, as they had some strong attachments to the library and the Tree of Knowledge, but eventually they would come around. But what about the timeline? Well, since Robin has completely changed the past, young Robin grows up supported, never hunted, and never develops the need to hide and survive alone. She still becomes an archaeologist, but her primary goal now would just be to search for more past relics like poneglyphs and ancient weapons. The world government still hunt the scholars down, but they can never find them. Robin never meets Luffy, as she has to keep a low profile and never joins the crew. Wow, what a bittersweet ending. But what do you think happened with Franky? Well, obviously he went back in time and prevented Tom's execution. With Tom alive, young Franky never has to mature through guilt. He stays a shipwright but doesn't build his dream ship with the same conviction. Without the trauma of Water 7, he never joins Luffy, and the Thousand Sunny is never built. Man, seems like all the Straw Hats' journeys lead to them never meeting. Before we cover Brook's journey through time, let's cover Jinbei's. Jinbei probably has the most successful time jump. He obviously goes back in time and prevents the death of Fisher Tiger and Queen Otohime. But what exactly happened to the timeline? After Jinbei saved both Fisher Tiger and Queen Otohime, younger Jinbei greatly looked up to him and vowed to be as strong as him. This caused Jinbei to train even harder to become a great pirate like future Jinbei. Fisher Tiger continued leading the Sun Pirates and even came to trust humans even more. Raising Koala on the ship taught him that human blood is not so bad. Otohime continued pushing for peace and achieved her goal of mass relocating Fishman Island residents to the surface world. Jinbei stayed loyal to Tiger and Otohime, never joining Big Mom and later never allying with Luffy. And finally, we have to talk about Brook's journey. Brook always regretted not being strong enough to save his old pirate crew, but now he finally has the chance to do so. So he went back in time a few months before the Rumbar Pirates' demise. He arrived on the ship and all his crewmates were extremely shocked to see two Brooks, but he explained to them that he's from the future. He then broke into tears and told them everything that happened when they entered the Florian Triangle. Saddened by this, younger Brook started playing his favorite song, 𝑩𝒄𝒐𝒆, and everyone cheered up and began to party. It was such a wholesome moment. The crew promised future Brook that they would not go through the Florian Triangle and try to survive, and this had some insane effects on the future. The Rumbar Pirates sail on, but Brook never eats the revive fruit since he never dies. They meet up with Laboon much earlier, as Brook told them that he waited for a long time in the future. Brook never experiences his 50 years of loneliness. The thing that gives his bond with the Straw Hats so much weight. He stays with the Rumbar Pirates and never meets Luffy. Every choice warps the world, shattering the threads that once tied them together. The Straw Hats watch visions of broken futures, a world where they never meet. The crew returns to the present, shaken. They realize that every loss, every tragedy, and every scar made them who they are. The time machine doesn't just alter events, it erases the bonds they built. Robin, with tears in her eyes, says, "History cannot be erased, even our own." Sanji smokes in silence. Zoro grits his teeth. Nami clutches her tattoo. Luffy, for once, doesn't smile. But then he stands up, slamming his fist on the machine. "I don't care about the past. I just want all of us together, right here, right now. That's enough for me." The others nod. Together, they destroy the time machine before it can tempt them again. As the waves crash against the Sunny, the Straw Hats gather on deck. The sunset bleeds gold across the horizon. They raise their mugs, toasting not to the past, but to the future. "We've already got the greatest treasure," Luffy grins. "Each other. Whatever pain they carry, they know one thing. They found each other because of it." We still have 2 more what-if scenarios, and these 2 are probably the best ones yet. Have you ever wondered what would have happened if Luffy, Law, and Captain Kidd were on the same crew? Would they completely dominate the new world and become the strongest pirate crew ever assembled? Or would they sink within 48 hours because none of them can agree on anything? Well, for this story to make sense, we'll have to assume that Luffy, Law, and Kidd met for the first time around the area where Luffy first set sail in the original story. In a small boat drifting in the middle of nowhere, a 17-year-old boy screams about becoming king of the pirates. Except this time, someone else is also drifting nearby. Luffy's boat crashes straight into a larger, heavily damaged vessel. This is none other than the ship of a young Eustace Kidd, who had entered the East Blue early, hunting for parts and scrap metal to fix the ship he stole. Kidd sees Luffy and instantly wants to crush him for ramming his boat, while Luffy yells back at him for disturbing his declaration. They threaten to kill each other, but then are interrupted by Law, who climbs out from below deck and tells Kidd to calm down. They could use Luffy's help. Kidd would obviously be annoyed to see Law bossing him around. If you're wondering why Law is on Kidd's ship, well, in this timeline, Law hasn't joined Doflamingo's crew, though he grew up with them. He was wandering the blues, studying medicine, and dealing with Kidd, whom he teamed up with temporarily because the Marines were hunting them down for stealing a ship. Luffy jumps onto their ship, starts running around excited to finally see other pirates. Kidd tries to throw him overboard, while Law already looks fed up with these two constantly bickering. But that's when Luffy tells Law and Kidd about his dream. Not just becoming Pirate King, but his secret dream the series still hasn't revealed yet. Kidd bursts out laughing, calling Luffy stupid and crazy while Law smirks. Then Luffy tells both of them to join his crew and sail the Grand Line together. At first, Kidd thought this idea was out of the question, as he would never follow anyone. But then he changed his mind and agreed to sail together, on the condition that all 3 of them remain the captains of the crew. Luffy agrees, and Law just goes along with it. The 3 of them try to repair Kidd's ship the best they can, so they can at least sail to a nearby island to get it properly fixed. Similar to the main story, they sail to Shell's Town. Once they get there, Law suggests they look for parts to properly fix the ship. While Law and Kidd do that, Luffy wanders around looking for a known pirate hunter he's heard so much about. Just like before, Luffy would find Zoro, captured by the Marines. Everything would play out the same as the main story, with Luffy retrieving Zoro's swords and asking him to join the crew. They would later meet up with Law and Kidd once they finish looking for parts. Kidd and Zoro would already hate each other, asking Luffy why he would let a pirate hunter join a pirate crew. Law would be confused as well, but Luffy would tell them he's strong and will be a great addition to the crew. They would eventually accept Zoro into the crew and move on to their next location, Orange Town. There, they would find Nami and free her from the Buggy Pirates, with Buggy being absolutely terrified of Kidd. I mean, who wouldn't be? Just like the main story, Luffy would ask Nami to join the crew as they needed a navigator. Realizing how strong Luffy, Zoro, Kidd, and Law are, I believe she would accept under the condition that they help her get rid of the Arlong pirates from her village. Luffy would immediately accept, and this would anger the other 3, but they would later come around. Since the crew is now heading to Kokoyashi Village and already have somewhat of a decent ship, they would never sail to Syrup Village. Therefore, Usopp would never join the crew. Anyways, Kokoyashi 𝑦𝒂𝒆𝒔𝒕𝒆𝒓 village would have to wait, as Luffy and Kid would both moan about being so hungry. Zoro would also join in, saying he needs a drink, and that's when the crew would take a small detour to a floating restaurant known as the 𝒂𝒂𝒆𝒔𝒕𝒆𝒓. Nami would obviously not be pleased by this, but wouldn't mind, as it would be just a quick stop. However, this is where the crew would encounter their first major problem on their journey. Once they arrive, Luffy and Kid would order an incredibly large amount of food and eat as much as possible, causing them to stay on the floating restaurant for a few more days. Nami would be fed up with the delays and end up sailing off on her own, leaving the crew behind. Luffy and Kid would love Sanji's cooking so much that together they ask him to join the crew. Similar to the main story, he is reluctant at first, but later accepts the invitation with the push of 𝒄𝒆𝒓. Soon after, Don Krieg would arrive, causing fear and panic in the restaurant. But not to worry, as the crew has 3 strong captains who easily take turns beating up Krieg and his crew. Although the crew defeats the Krieg pirates much earlier in this story, it's not all good, as Mihawk would now see the crew as somewhat of a threat with how many strong members they have. Zoro would ask Kid, Law, and Luffy to back off as he wants to challenge Mihawk to a duel. They would oblige, and just as in the main story, Zoro would get swept pretty easy with him declaring his promise to Luffy that he will never lose again, which would impress Mihawk. Mihawk would then have a brief chat with the crew, telling them that they might just be a crew to fear soon enough if they keep going on like this. Kid would yell obviously, and Mihawk would leave. The crew would later land in 𝑦𝒂𝒆𝒔𝒕𝒆𝒓 village. Law and Kid, not wanting to waste any more time here, would swiftly head to Arlong Park and would obliterate the entire crew, not even needing Zoro's help at all. Luffy would still be the one to defeat Arlong though. Nami would officially join the crew, and the villagers would briefly celebrate their victory before the crew set sail to their next destination, Log Town. In this timeline, Zoro would fully recover by the time they reached the town, seeing as he didn't have to face any fishmen with Law, Kid, Sanji, and Luffy taking care of all of them. Not only that, considering how strong the crew is now, especially with their 3 captains, I doubt Buggy would try to get revenge in this timeline. I mean, he is completely terrified of Kid. With rumors circulating about a new crew with 3 captains, the Marines would issue each of them their first bounty. I believe Luffy and Kid would already get a bounty of over 200 million berries, with Law getting a 100 million. Luffy and Kid would be very annoyed and continuously fight because they share the same bounty. But a bigger bounty doesn't always mean good things. This would cause the Marines to give more attention to the crew by providing Smoker with more men to go after them. Once the crew arrived in Log Town, everything would go quite similarly to the main story, with Luffy, Law, and Kid going to the same bar that Gold Roger once visited. But this time, the old man in the bar would tell the 3 of them that they remind him of an infamous crew known as the Rocks Pirates back in the day. Luffy and Kid would both be confused, and Law would give a little smirk as he knows some things about the Rocks Pirates from his time living with Doflamingo. Smoker and the Marines would hunt down the crew, but this time Kid would tell everyone that they're not running away, and with Law and Kid to help, the Straw Hats would easily defeat the Marines. Dragon would observe Luffy from the shadows, and he wouldn't step in to save him this time. By the time the crew reached Reverse Mountain, their bounties would have all increased, with Luffy, Law, and Kid all getting a 500 million bounty already. Zoro and Sanji would follow with a bounty of 100 million apiece, and Nami would get a 20 million bounty. This is because the crew single-handedly defeated a Marine unit, including a respected leader like Smoker. The government would see them as a bigger threat than in the main story. The crew would later go through Reverse Mountain and come across Laboon. The crew would make the same promise as before, while Crocus would look at that trio and see a little bit of Roger, Rocks, and Whitebeard in them. Whiskey Pete goes much quicker than in the original story, with the crew defeating all the bandits and uncovering the Baroque work plot immediately because of Law's incredible intellect. Vivi, realizing she has no choice, would reveal her identity and ask the crew for help. Law would be reluctant to get with the idea of letting the crew get involved with a warlord of the sea, but Luffy would persuade him. There would be no little garden and Drum Island because Law would refuse to waste time, and the crew wouldn't really need a doctor since they have him, which means Chopper wouldn't join the crew, which is quite sad. The crew would head straight for Alabasta. After reaching the shores of the desert country, Law would tell the crew to wait for him on the ship while he takes Vivi back to her father Cobra, but we all know this crew wouldn't listen. Kid and Zoro would want some of that desert drinks, while Sanji and Luffy would want to explore the country, and Nami would just go along with them, while saying she really can't wait to get another female on the crew. Law would come back to the ship with no one there, and would decide to just chill while he waits for them. Meanwhile, after Kid and Zoro finished their little drinking competition, they would circle up with Luffy and the others and decide to confront Crocodile. Figuring out his weakness to water much earlier, they would easily defeat him in Baroque works, all while Meanwhile, Law just chilled on the ship. Kid would question Robin, asking her why she joined Crocodile, and would quickly realize that she's the demon child Nico Robin from the destroyed Ohara. Unlike the main story, they would ask her to join the crew. Knowing she can read the poneglyphs, Kid would promise her that no harm would come to her as long as she is a member of his crew. Robin would accept. Nami would be over the moon that the crew finally have another girl. By the end of the arc, Luffy would meet Ace, and instead of celebrating, would spend some time with him before they left. After leaving, a ship would fall from the sky, and everyone would be shocked by this except Law. He would tell them that he's heard rumors about islands floating in the sky, and without hesitation, Kid and Luffy would declare they're going to the sky next. But before that, they would have to go to Jaya. So how would a meeting between Luffy and Blackbeard go now that he has Law and Kid to back him up? Well, pretty interesting actually. Blackbeard would have already heard about Luffy, Law, and Kid because of their insanely high bounties as rookies, and would try really hard not to get into a fight with them. Luffy and Blackbeard would still have their little argument over pies, but nothing more. Bellamy wouldn't even dare try to attack the crew, as seeing Kid would absolutely send him running. After that, everything that happened in the main story would pretty much happen here, with Luffy, Law, Kid, and the Straw Hats reaching Skypiea. This arc would go painfully quickly, with Kid and Luffy teaming up to take down Enel. Luffy would then ring the golden bell, and the crew would later party with the Sky Islanders. They would later show Robin and Law the poneglyphs. After that, the crew would go back to the mainland. I'm going to totally skip Long Ring Longland because come on, just look at this crew. The Straw Hats would then arrive on Water 7. Kid and Law would decide that they need a new ship because this one is kinda old. They would obviously meet the Galley La Company, and Iceberg would offer to build them a ship with Frankie's help. The Thousand Sunny would finally be built. Law would say they need a shipwright on the crew in case the ship breaks again, and that's when Luffy would spontaneously ask Frankie to join. He would reluctantly accept after a little peer pressure from Iceberg. But before the crew could leave, CP9 would reveal themselves and declare their intention to take Nico Robin. But not only her, they would also want to capture Trafalgar Law, as the world government knows exactly how dangerous and powerful his fruit is. This would cause a huge battle, almost tearing half of Water 7 to the depths of the ocean. But the crew would eventually take down the Cypher Pole agents, with Luffy, Kid, and Law giving Lucci a combined attack to end the fight. This was kinda overkill, but hey, if anyone deserves it, it's Lucci. This would give Frankie even more confirmation that he did the right thing by joining the crew. Soon after, Garp would land on Water 7 and would reveal that he is Luffy's grandpa. The crew would all be shocked except for Law and Robin. They kinda already knew with them sharing the same surname, duh! So obviously there is no Enies Lobby arc, and the crew would set sail for Thriller Bark, defeating Moria pretty easily and gaining a new crew member in Brook. Kid would be freaked out by him though. In this timeline, Luffy, Law, and Kid would share most of the strong opponents among them. But to make up for that, the three captains would train together, including Zoro and Sanji. They would all fight each other continuously and grow their strength that way, with Luffy even unlocking his gears thanks to Law's observation of how his devil fruit works. But would this be enough to help the crew come out unscathed in Sabaody? You'll have to wait and see. At Sabaody, most events will go pretty much the same. The crew would meet Rayleigh, and he would vividly tell them about a crew back in his time that resembles their own. Kid and Luffy would both shout, "We're not like any other pirate crew, you know? I'll be king of the pirates!" Rayleigh would laugh, while Kid and Luffy start fighting. Same as in the main story, Luffy would punch St. Charlos, and the Marines would be called in. This is where the crew would face a huge defeat. With the crew being much stronger and more well-known than in the main series, the world government would send considerably stronger Marines to deal with them, on top of Kizaru and the others. With this many strong opponents, the crew would not make it out, and similar to the main story, be defeated and sent to remote islands thanks to Kuma. Kuma would also send Law and Kid to Amazon Lily with Luffy, since all three of them are captains. Around this time, news of Ace's capture would go public. Luffy would immediately decide to rescue Ace. Kid and Law would obviously come along with him since all three of them are like brothers now. Just like the original story, Boa Hancock would help Luffy sneak into Impel Down along with his fellow captains. There, everything else would play out pretty much the same, but with the three captains having a much easier time in Impel Down, even taking out Magellan. All thanks to Law and Kid using their devil fruits to overpower the Warden. After defeating Magellan, it would pretty much be a cakewalk for the three captains to make it down to Ace. As soon as Ace saw Luffy, he would be happy to see his brother once again. The three captains would then break out Ace and Jinbei. On his way back, they would also free Ivankov and the rest of the other prisoners, causing a massive prison break. Law would formulate a plan to allow them to escape using the prison break as a distraction. And with that, Luffy would have successfully rescued Ace, stopping the Paramount War in its entirety. Due to the war never happening, Whitebeard would still be alive, and Blackbeard would not eat the Tremor fruit, at least not for a while. The Marines would also issue Ace, Luffy, Law, Kid, and Jinbei new bounties, as their escape would be a great offense to the government's authority, with the three captains each getting a 1 billion berry bounty way before the time skip. Ace's bounty would also be raised to 1 billion, and Jinbei's would be around the 800 million mark. Luffy would ask Ace and Jinbei to join his crew, but they would both politely refuse. Before going back to the Island of Women, the three captains would inform their crew that they should meet again in 2 years, as they need to train to get stronger. Rayleigh would train the three of them, and by the end of the 2 years, Luffy, Law, and Kid would all have mastered all 3 basic forms of Haki and dabble in a little bit of the advanced forms. Luffy would also unlock all his gears by this point, except for Gear 5, which would come later on, but we'll get to that in a bit. After 2 years, the crew would return to Sabaody, and then head to Fishman Island after getting their ship coded. I believe this arc would go pretty quickly for the newly revamped Straw Hats. They would move on to Punk Hazard, where they would meet Kinemon and Momonosuke. And just like Fishman Island, this arc would be a cakewalk for the crew, with the crew being so strong and famous in this timeline, even more so than in the main story. Doflamingo would be extra wary of their arrival on Dressrosa. This is also where Law's words to Bellamy would finally be realized, as the three captains would have no problem defeating the Don Quixote family, with Law, Kid, and Luffy teaming up to completely obliterate Doflamingo. By this point, rumors would start circulating of a crew with 3 Yonko-level captains. With these rumors reaching Big Mom and Kaido, they would decide to team up in order to bring down these rookies, who basically declared war on both of them. Law would then formulate a plan to take over Big Mom's territory while she is away in Wano, by splitting up the crew, with Zoro, Sanji, Robin, Frankie, Nami, and Brook being sent to deal with things in Zou, like defeating Jack and reading the poneglyphs, while the 3 captains take over the entire Whole Cake Island on their own, with Law defeating Smoothie, Kid defeating Cracker, and Luffy defeating Katakuri. This would enrage Big Mom, and she would want to get revenge immediately. But before that, the new bounties would be released, giving all 3 captains bounties of over 4 billion berries and naming all 3 of them Yonkos, with the rest of the crew also getting an increase in bounty. Also, I forgot to mention in this timeline, since Ace is still alive, he ends up defeating Blackbeard on their second bout after getting stronger in the time skip, and there would now be 7 Yonkos instead of 4. I'm not very good at Japanese, but I think that the Yonko would be now known as the Shichiko or Nanako, based on Google Translate. By this point, Luffy, Law, and Kid would be equal in terms of strength, but Luffy would begin surpassing the 2 captains slowly. And now with the Straw Hats taking over Big Mom's territory, the stage would be set for an all-out war in Wano. When the crew reaches Wano, Kaido and Big Mom immediately attack, but this time, Law tells the other 2 captains to deal with Kaido while he takes Big Mom down on his own. The rest of the crew would fight the Beast Pirates. The battle would be fierce, with both sides going all out, but eventually the Straw Hats would get the win, with Zoro and Sanji taking down King and Queen. Meanwhile, the battle between Big Mom and Law would cause the skies to split. Law would awaken his Devil Fruit, as well as use advanced armament and observation Haki to defeat Big Mom after a hard-fought battle. And now let's talk about the main fight, Luffy and Kid versus Kaido. It's fair to say this fight would shake the One Piece world. Luffy would unlock Gear 5, while Kid would awaken his Devil Fruit. Kaido would be an absolute mess. Everything he tried, the two would counter, and by the end of the bout, Luffy and Kid would stand victorious after combining a final attack of Captain Kid's railgun and Luffy's Gum Gum Bajrang gun. The entire world would be shocked to hear the news. Shanks would be ridiculously proud of Luffy. Meanwhile, the world government would be in a frenzy, calling this crew the next Rocks Pirates, with Big News Morgan even labeling this era of piracy as the Luffy, Law, and Kid era. The 3 captains would gain a combined bounty of 17 billion, which is just so crazy to even imagine. With the crew's collective bounty being so ridiculously high, I don't even want to mention it. Just know everyone on the crew now has at least a billion to their names. Ace would hear of this and be super proud of Luffy. The crew would head to their next destination, but I think this is where our story ends. Wow, that was one of my favorites. Now for the last one. Have you ever wondered what would have happened if Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji all became admirals? Would they be able to defeat all the Yonko and find the One Piece before them? And most importantly, would they still be Marines after finding out the truth, or destroy the entire world government instead? Now, to make this scenario work, we need to dramatically change the early lives of all three of these characters. So let's start with the easiest one, Luffy. Let's imagine that Luffy's village was attacked by a brutal pirate crew. Maybe Shanks is out at sea and hasn't arrived at Fuchsia Village yet, so there's no one to save them. Just when all hope seems lost, a Marine Admiral, 𝒂𝒄𝒐𝒎𝒆, shows up and wipes out the pirates in seconds. This would be a huge turning point for Luffy, because instead of being inspired by Shanks to become a pirate, he's now inspired by 𝒂𝒂𝒄𝒐𝒎𝒆, who saved his village. This would be all the motivation he needs to join the Marines. Now, even though Luffy is going to join the Marines, he is still the same freedom-loving Luffy with the same goal of being the freest in the world. When Shanks finally comes to the village, Luffy still ends up eating the gum-gum fruit, which would cause an outrage in the bar as Shanks knows Luffy wants to be a Marine and not a pirate. But even so, he might still give him the straw hat, with the hope that Luffy might one day be inspired by it and leave the Marines to find the One Piece. Now let's move on to Zoro, and this one is actually pretty straightforward. The guy already wants to be the greatest swordsman in the world, and the current holder of that title, Dracula Mihawk, technically works alongside the Marines as a warlord. All it takes is a well-timed visit to Shimotsuki Village from Garp and his right-hand swordsman, Bogard. One training session with the Marine swordsman is enough to convince the young Zoro that the fastest path to Mihawk runs straight through the Marines. And now for Sanji, and this one has a bit more heart to it. Sanji doesn't have big dreams of being a pirate, he just wants to find the All Blue and cook incredible meals for the people he loves. His ticket to the Marines comes when Garp's family stops at the Baratier on their way to headquarters. Garp and 𝒄𝒆𝒄 connect over their shared past, the way old warriors do over a good meal. And while the adults talk, a young Sanji meets a young Luffy. These two would get along immediately. Honestly, maybe even better than in the original series. And while the kids play, Garp makes 𝒄𝒆𝒄 an offer. A life for Sanji where he could be trained by the best, have everything he needs, and pursue his dream with the full resources of the world government behind him. 𝒄𝒄 is stubborn, but he's a good man. He'd tell Sanji that if anyone could find the All Blue, it would be the world government. And with that childlike whimsy, Sanji joins the monkey family on their journey back to Marineford. So now we have our monster trio all inspired to join the Marines, but they're going to do it in very different ways. Even though Luffy and Sanji meet young, they're quickly split up for training after joining the Marines. With Zoro, he still has no idea who Luffy is, but he's heard a few things back when Garp came to his village. But even though they're separated, they're all climbing the ranks in their own ways. Let's start with Zoro, who stays close to Garp and Bogard. Since Luffy isn't freeing Koby from Alvida in this timeline, Garp needs a new apprentice, and Zoro fits the mold. Even at a young age, after Kuina's death, Zoro locked in completely. Garp and Bogard see the unbelievable potential in this kid and start refining him into a pirate hunting machine. In about a few months, Zoro would have already learned hockey and become an extremely strong Marine. We can say this because Koby did the same in the main story, and Zoro is definitely much stronger than him. But there's more to Zoro's path than just sword training. He ends up assigned to Sword, the Marines' covert Splinter Cell branch. There are rumors that one of the warlords is tied to the criminal syndicate Baroque Works, and the Marines need someone to infiltrate it from the inside. Zoro hunts down Mr. 5, takes him out, and works his way through the organization until he's facing Mr. Zero himself, Crocodile. Now, it might be weird for the Marines to want to take down one of their warlords, but in this timeline, the problem in Alabasta became too severe, and the Marines needed one of their own to quietly remove Crocodile. So they sent Zoro, with all the training from Garp and his motivation, to beat someone who shares the same title as Mihawk as a warlord. He defeats Crocodile. Now let's talk about Sanji's path. Upon his arrival, the Marines quickly realize that he's no normal human. They would figure out that he is actually a 𝒉𝒄𝒄 with Germa genes. And instead of wasting his training at Marine HQ, they would send him to a person who knows a lot about Germa genetics and is an ally to the world government, 𝒂𝒄𝒄 in Egghead. Dr. 𝒂𝒄𝒄 helps Sanji realize his true potential and trains him to control his Germa genetics way earlier than before. Kizaru would sometimes stop by the island to visit his old friends, and while on his visits, he would train Sanji too. The two of them are a natural fit, even if Sanji thinks the old man is insufferably laid back. And now, Monkey D. Luffy. So who does he train under? Sengoku makes the smartest possible call and assigns Luffy to train under Admiral Kuzan. This chill, calculating man turns out to be the perfect mentor for Luffy. Luffy's training arc takes him through the East Blue, where he dismantles every pirate crew causing causing trouble. Let's say about 3 years have passed since they all first set out. The trio is all around the 17 to 19 age range. Luffy has worked his way up the Marine ranks after cleaning up the East Blue. Zoro has successfully infiltrated and dismantled 𝑏𝒄𝒄𝒄 and earned his first warlord-adjacent reputation. And Sanji has become a super powerful 𝑦𝒂𝒆𝒔𝒕𝒆𝒓 soldier whom the government sends out to swiftly take out upcoming rookie pirates. This is where things get interesting, because the Marine brass has been watching these 3 rising stars very carefully. They decide to send all 3 of them to the Grand Line at the same time, under the command of different captains, to see how they perform. Luffy gets assigned to Captain Smoker in Logtown, which immediately results in them annoying each other constantly. Zoro also gets paired with Smoker, which is its own special kind of chaos given to Shigi's resemblance to Kuina, though Zoro refuses to acknowledge it bothers him at all. And Sanji gets assigned to Captain Hina. As they enter the Grand Line, the 3 of them start hearing about each other through Marine intelligence, and I think they'd all be pretty curious about each other. Their first real meeting happens at Marine headquarters during a special debriefing about 2 years into their Grand Line service. All 3 are now captains, and when these 3 finally meet face to face, the sparks fly. Zoro challenges Sanji to a fight because he heard about his blackleg style and wants to test it. And Sanji obviously agrees to fight, because there's no way this moss-headed swordsman is stronger than him. This results in them destroying an entire training ground at Marine headquarters, which gets all 3 of them in serious trouble. But it also marks the beginning of a very intense rivalry, especially between Zoro and Sanji. I should say that Luffy and Zoro already became close during their time spent with Smoker, and he already met Sanji when he was much younger. However, before we continue with their rise through the ranks, let's talk about what's happening in the rest of the world. Even with these 3 in the Marines, the pirate world is still absolutely wild. Blackbeard would still betray Whitebeard and kill Thatch to steal the Yami Yami no Mi. The Straw Hat Pirates don't exist in this timeline, but powerful pirate crews are still running rampant. Maybe Nami becomes a navigator for hire on her own terms. Usopp lives in his village telling tall tales. And Robin, well, she'll come back into the story very soon. Now, the Marines see incredible potential in Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji, so they do something special. Each of them gets assigned to an admiral to shadow and see what they do, but the Marines make sure not to pair them with the same admirals they grew up training with. Luffy gets paired with Kizaru. They're both kind of easygoing and unpredictable, though Kizaru's slow, methodical approach to everything drives Luffy absolutely crazy. Zoro gets assigned to Aokiji, and Sanji gets stuck training more intensively under Akainu. This training is where all 3 of them fully master Haki. Around about this time, Imu and the Gorosei would also be hearing about Luffy and his Devil Fruit. They'd probably be super happy to have the Nika Fruit in their control. After 1 year of shadowing the admirals, all 3 of them emerge as rear admirals at around age 20. They're now some of the strongest Marines in the entire organization, and the world government is starting to see them as the future. But here's where their different philosophies start causing problems. Luffy still has his unshakable sense of freedom. He wants to chase after the strongest opponents and protect people, but he's getting increasingly frustrated with the rules, the politics, and especially the way the world government treats the celestial dragons. Now let's talk about major events that would still unfold. The Paramount War is still going to happen, but it's going to look very different. Blackbeard still captures someone connected to Whitebeard. Maybe Ace still becomes a pirate and gets captured. This would tear Luffy apart, caught between his duty as a rear admiral and his love for his brother. Zoro would tell him bluntly, make a choice and commit to it. Sanji would already be in full support of Luffy no matter what. During the war at Marineford, all 3 would be there as rear admirals, expected to fight against the Whitebeard pirates. Luffy would be torn between saving Ace, his brother, or following orders. Zoro and Sanji would be ready to back him up in whatever decision he chooses. I think during the chaos, Luffy chooses to save Ace, even if it means defying orders. But even with all 3 of them working together, they can't save Ace. Maybe they get him off the platform, but Akainu pursues with absolute intent. And in a moment of sacrifice, Ace still falls protecting Luffy. This hits all 3 of them so hard, they truly believe they could have done it. Luffy is devastated and questions everything. He would begin hating Akainu. Even when Garp tried to console the boy, he would constantly tell his grandpa that he would one day kill the admiral. But even so, instead of leaving the Marines, the 3 of them make a pact. They'll stay and rise to the top, and they'll change things from inside, which Garp convinced them to do. After Marineford, all 3 are promoted to vice admirals despite technically defying orders during the battle. The government would just punish them, as losing the Nika Fruit user while they have him under control is a move even they are not stupid enough to make. Same as the main story, Sengoku steps down as Fleet Admiral. Akainu and Aokiji have their legendary duel on Punk Hazard. Aokiji loses and leaves the Marines. This hits particularly hard for Luffy and Zoro, who trained under him. But it also means Admiral positions are opening up. Over the next few months, Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji go on an absolute rampage through the New World. The trio becomes so powerful that they literally rival the Admirals in strength and might even be stronger. Now, one of the many unspoken rules of Marines is to never meddle with Yonko. But Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji wouldn't care at all, as they've seen how Big Mom treats people who live in her territory, so they go after her. And with the three of them all being Admiral level, I think they can take her on and defeat the Big Mom pirates completely. They also take down Doflamingo and Dressrosa. These major wins against pirates earn them massive global recognition. The Marines can't ignore these accomplishments any longer. At around age 21, all three of them are promoted to the vacant Admiral spots. Since there are only 2 spots open, Kizaru would make the selfless decision and step down as Admiral to give Sanji his spot. Because their time together in Egghead, he would know that Sanji can do more good than he ever could. Garp would be the proudest grandpa ever and remind them that they're doing this for Ace. Now, as Admirals, they have far more freedom, but the politics of the world government are becoming impossible to ignore. Luffy keeps butting heads with the 5 Elders and the Celestial Dragons over basic human decency. But their biggest challenge is still coming. With Big Mom down, the race for the One Piece is intensifying. Blackbeard has 2 Devil Fruits and is becoming a genuine world-ending threat. And Kaido is also now after the One Piece. The world government orders the 3 Admiral troublemakers to ensure no one finds the One Piece. But Luffy is more curious about it than ever. Zoro doesn't care about gold or treasure, but he does care about the truth. And Sanji, who knows more than either of them thanks to his time with Vegapunk, already suspects what they'll find. So the 3 of them make a secret pact to find the One Piece themselves. Not to claim it, but to know the truth. This leads them on a covert mission to find the road poneglyphs. They have to be careful. If the world government finds out, they will be branded as traitors immediately. They eventually track down Robin, through Zoro, who spent some time with her during his operations as an undercover Baroque Works agent. And Luffy asks her to help them. The 4 of them, with Robin's knowledge and the trio's incredible fighting capabilities, find all 4 road poneglyphs. With Robin by their side and no one to stop them, they'd find them pretty easily. And now they set their sail for the final island on the Grand Line, Laugh Tale. And when they arrive, they discover the truth about everything. The Void Century, the ancient weapons, the true nature of the world government, and what Joy Boy actually was. Luffy would finally realize what his Devil Fruit actually is. So to answer your question from the beginning, yes, the trio would later leave the Marines after finding out the truth and begin the attack against the Celestial Dragons and Emu. But what do you think would happen after this moment? Leave your comments down below. Click this video where I explore what would happen if Luffy, Law, and Captain Kidd were on one crew. I know you want to click it.